This portion of Drive Time is made possible as a public service by Leona McDonald Roberts, certified public accountants with locations here in North Conway and throughout New Hampshire. I'm Tony Zorn. I'm joined by Isaac Hadam. He's the president of the Constitutional Awareness Pact, also joined by Erlon Jones, cabinet member of the Constitutional Awareness Pact, and we're celebrating the 230th Constitution Day. Technically was yesterday. For more information on the Constitutional Awareness Pact, who are joining me, you can go online and check them out at Facebook. Thank you both for joining me.
Not a problem. My pleasure. Thank you for having us.
It's 230 years since the Constitution was signed, and thus kicking off the ratification process and the debate that our country had before we became officially this constitutional republic. What exactly happened on that day and what it means for America?
The Constitution at the time it was ratified was really such a radical idea that had never been tested. If you looked at a majority of the nations at that time, they were all monarchies. This representative form of government was so different. But if you look at each of the articles, Article 1 really deals with the Congress, what powers the Congress has, what its job is, what it can do. Article 2 deals with the executive branch, mainly the president, what your qualifications have to be the president, what his powers, duties are. Article 3 deals with the courts, mainly Supreme Court, what their jurisdiction is, what they have power over. Article 4 has some of the few provisions for the states that the federal Constitution mentions. Article 5 deals with amending the Constitution, which is really an underrated portion of what our Constitution does, the fact we can change it. Article 6 deals with the Constitution being the supreme law of the land, binding all lower governments underneath into one nation. And Article 7 deals with exactly how the Constitution is supposed to be ratified.
The Articles of Confederation was the government at the time. They required every single state to approve of something before it could be done on a national level. And Article 7 of the Constitution only required 2/3 of the states, or 9 states, in order to ratify the Constitution. So that must have been a little controversial, I imagine, at the time it was passed.
Absolutely, because the Articles of Confederation were really based on states having a lot of independent freedom, which is a good thing, states having the freedom to make decisions. But there was such a swing. I mean, it's rare to have 2 people who agree on every single thing. So when you suddenly have 12 people having to agree on something, it just made it virtually impossible to get any real duty done.
Imagine today if we had to get every single 50 of the states to agree on something before we could do anything on the federal level. That would be a disaster. So that might be a little harder to do things. Now, on top of the Constitution, one of the parts of it was the Anti-Federalists were kind of critical and skeptical of the amount of power that was being put into the federal tier. So they asked for 10 amendments to be added on as part of the deal of ratifying this.
Mm-hmm. Yep. The Bill of Rights, a guarantee of personal rights. You have the First Amendment, obviously, granting freedom of religion, speech, press, redress of grievances, to peacefully protest. Just ones that would guarantee the proper protection of liberty and freedom. Absolutely, yeah.
And so that was the Bill of Rights, and that basically cemented the limitations of the federal tier. Some people thought that wasn't necessary when they passed it, and if you really want to get into the debate about that, you could always read the Federalist and Anti-Federalist papers, which were publications at the time, but that basically cemented the different rights that individuals and states had when it came to the Constitution.
Yep.
Overall, there have been 27 amendments.
Yes. That's I was mentioning earlier, I think that's one of the best parts of our Constitution is that we're capable of changing it over time. And I think some interesting ones are, I think the whole first 10 Bill of Rights are really key. But I think some that are really interesting is obviously you have the 18th Amendment, which is the only amendment to have ever been repealed by the 21st Amendment, obviously Prohibition. And then you have the 27th Amendment, which was originally proposed to the states for ratification in 1789. And was officially ratified 203 years later in 1992.
So that would have been one of the original Bill of Rights. We would have had 11 amendments right off the bat if that had passed.
Technically, you could probably qualify it as that, yes.
Wow. If I remember correctly, that amendment was basically saying Congress can't give themselves a raise or something along those lines?
Or if they do give themselves a raise, it does not apply to those who are in office at the time, which I think is, it kind of gives a tell-all about how little our founding fathers trusted government officials, to be honest.
Right, and the fact that it stuck around and actually got past plus years later kind of says something about, well, maybe this was a good idea at
Absolutely,
the time. Yep. So this is, if you're just tuning in, the Constitutional Awareness Pack. You can find them on Facebook, and they're talking to me about the 230th Constitution Day. The day itself marks when the Constitution was signed in Article 7, which really kicked off the debates. Wasn't actually the date for the Constitution being ratified.
The actual ratification was when the state of New Hampshire ratified the Constitution, becoming the 9th state, on June 21st, 1788. So almost a year later, the Constitution became the official law of the land.
At the time, the constitutional debate that was going on, the people who were forwarding the Constitution knew that states would be hesitant to relinquish their power. So in Article 7, they didn't just ask that 9 states ratify it, but they also asked that the people of the 9 different states ratify it instead of the state governments themselves.
Absolutely, because politicians tend to, by nature, worry about political future, whereas people are more concerned about what their actual, what's going to affect us in a good way, and they don't have to wade through what's good for their potential career.
Now, I got to ask both of you, since this is Constitution Day, what's your favorite part of the Constitution? What really speaks to you?
I tend to look at the first parts of the Constitution, the articles. I certainly believe it's important. It's important to realize the genius that the Founding Fathers had in laying out our form of government, not only on how it functions, but also the protections that it offers the people in regards to their liberties. It's just amazing, especially nowadays in our fractured political climate down in Washington and across the country. It's amazing how the Constitution functions to protect us, no matter how complicated or troubling the situation.
I think the first 3 articles that lay out each of the 3 branches of government, what they do, those are huge, and it's probably either that or else the First Amendment is obviously a huge part of our Constitution.
And finally, what do you think the takeaway from Constitution Day should be?
I think it's important for people to look at the Constitution and celebrate Constitution Day. It doesn't have to be anything big or elaborate. It's just to take a moment to reflect how blessed we are in this nation to have a representative government and a document that guarantees our freedom each and every day.
Especially nowadays, there's so many people out there that criticize the Constitution and the Founding Fathers, but all they have to do is go spend a little time in Venezuela or Iraq or somewhere, North Korea, and they'll realize very quickly how blessed we are by having this document and having the government that we have. It's certainly not a government without problems. We have them like every country does, but I wouldn't want to live anyplace else or be under any other kind of rule of law.
All right. Well, Isaac and Erlon, thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure.
Yeah, thank you.
It's the Constitution.